Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our Brooklyn Forum on the path to ranked choice voting, the final event in a 5-part series bringing together policymakers, leaders from government, advocates, academics, and of course, the media. I'm Zach Williams, staff reporter at City and State. Before we jump into our event, I would like to thank our great sponsor, Spectrum, for helping us put together this wonderful discussion. It's been quite a journey discussing the pros and cons of ranked choice voting over the last couple weeks. It really is an exciting time. This is the first year that the city is using ranked choice voting, which is already changing how candidates campaign for elective office across the city. We got a diverse group of experts to unpack how it all works and what it means looking forward to the 2021 mayoral race. But before we get to their insights, Najee Roach, Director of State Government Affairs at Charter Communications, has a few things to say to help us set the mood. Thanks so much, Najee. What do you got to say?
Thank you, Zach, for that introduction. And I have to say, it feels like we've been on a world tour and we are at our last stop. And as appropriate for the occasion, this is the first time that my ode to Brooklyn, the Great Brooklyn Bridge, is not going to be mocked on a Zoom call. So shout out to the beautiful borough of Brooklyn and to everyone joining us today. I've said this before on these opening remarks that this is such an important conversation and it's such an exciting time, to be in tune with what's happening in our electoral process. And I just think, critical to the business of information, which is what Charter Communications is all about. We make information available through connectivity to the internet, cable TV programming, and of course through everyone's favorite New York One. And it's important that we not only keep voters informed on how the electoral process is changing, but that we make the information available so that everyone can understand the role that they play and how their votes count and how their votes matter. And of course, as we all now know by the final stop on our tour here, 2021 brought us ranked choice voting in New York City, also known as instant runoff voting. Now, as most of us here are familiar with, we know that this is a sort of a turning point in how our votes are counted here in New York City. But the whole point of these forums was to make sure that we could assemble the experts, the Avengers, if you will, so that New Yorkers can get one-on-one, firsthand information about how this process is going to work. And like everything else in our great city, there's pros, there's cons, and there's opinions on all sides of the conversation. But today's conversation is about bringing that to the forefront so New Yorkers can hear it for themselves. How will this change the voting experience? How is it going to change how candidates are able to reach their audience? And so for our part, Spectrum is pleased to help bring this discussion to the forefront. And like I said, the Brooklyn chapter promises to be an exciting one. We've got some great guests here today, and I'm excited to get into that panel conversation. So I'll turn it back over to you. Let's get us on the show.
Thanks again, Najee. That was great. She is right. Brooklyn, as a Brooklyn guy, having lived there many years, this is the real one, where the big time, where that really matters. But there is a learning curve to ranked choice voting, that's for sure. I think it's pretty easy once you get it, but first you got to learn how it all works. And luckily for all of you, our wonderful audience, we got just the person, one of the few reporters out there that really knows the ins and outs of this new voting system and what it means for the 2021 Democratic primary for mayor, of course, my colleague at City and State, Rebecca Lewis.
Thank you for that introduction, Zach. Ranked choice voting is one of my favorite topics to cover. I love talking about it, so I've really enjoyed hosting these panel discussions for the last several weeks, making sure that everyone who tunes in and whoever they might tell after they tune in know what's going on with the elections coming up, and that they're informed and educated and are able to use it to the best of their ability. So today we are starting off with our mayoral interview. This time around, unfortunately, Comptroller Scott Stringer is not able to join us live in person, but he provided a short video for us where he talks about ranked choice voting. So let's hear from Comptroller Stringer and see what he has to say about ranked choice voting.
The 2021 New York City mayoral election will be historic. For the first time in history, New York City voters will pick their next mayor through ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is a groundbreaking reform that will breathe new life into our democracy. Instead of just choosing one candidate on the ballot, voters will rank candidates in the order of their preference, ranking up to 5 candidates. The winner will need to win 50% of the total votes cast plus one once votes have been fully redistributed. I am a firm believer that ranked choice voting will strengthen our democracy, give everyone a voice, and ensure no community is ignored. On top of expanding our democracy, ranked choice voting also avoids the need for costly runoff elections and saves taxpayer money. It's the fairest, most efficient way to bring about the true expression of the people's will. Any candidate who wants to be New York City mayor will have to talk to New Yorkers in all corners of the city, in every borough and neighborhood, and build a broad coalition to win this race. That's exactly what I'm doing every day, and I'll continue to do it all the way through Election Day. We are leading a diverse, multi-ethnic, intergenerational coalition to build a fairer, stronger, and more equitable city for all New Yorkers.
Well, I'd like to thank Comptroller Stringer, who again was unfortunately not able to join us today. I think we all know just how busy that mayoral campaign trail is, and how many virtual forums there are going on. So it's understandable. It's unfortunate, but understandable. So I'd like to thank him, even though he's not here, for sending in that video before we got started. And before we jump into the panel, just wanted to make want to touch base about the fact that we have had the first 4 ranked choice elections in New York City, the most recent just on Tuesday. We're already beginning to see some of this in action. The first time around it did not have the tabulation, but the second time around it did. And I saw some of that counting in person. For me, it was very exciting, and it was very interesting to see the way that the counting worked this time around. It was a hand count. The New York City Board of Elections released each round of counting so that voters could see exactly what happened each time someone was eliminated and who got the votes redistributed. It's very exciting to see this all kind of come into action now. During our first panel, we hadn't had any elections yet. Now our last panel, we've got 4 already. So obviously a lot is out there for us to learn from. A lot is out there for us to take experience from, and I hope that those experiences can really inform this final panel discussion here in Brooklyn, so that everyone who's tuned in is able to learn as much as they can before those June primaries. So I'd first like to hand it over to Sean Duger. He is the Education Campaign Program Director for Rank the Vote NYC. And before we start the panel, he's one of our panelists. He's going to break down exactly how it works with some informational videos and demonstrations, just so that, those technical questions you may have, hopefully this will help answer some of them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We are going to start off with our brand new video, but I need screen share. Give us just one moment.
It's not a virtual forum. It's not a virtual panel without at least one technical difficulty. So we apologize, but we'll get going very shortly.
Just give us one more moment. So let's do this. Let's talk about ranked choice voting as this is being figured out. So for the upcoming primary election, you all as voters will have the opportunity to rank your top 5 candidates for mayor, comptroller, public advocate, and borough president. In our video now, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Hi, I'm Mahir, and welcome to my bodega. As you may know, New York City has a new way to vote in special and primary elections. So, how does ranked choice voting work? The next time you vote in a city election, instead of choosing just one candidate, you can rank them all from your first choice to your fifth. Here's how it works. Let's say my bodega is picking its featured snack of the month. So many choices! Which one should I feature? This customer ranks Parker Pretzels as her top favorite. She also ranks her second choice, Mr. Chips, third choice, Chi-Chi Chicharrones, fourth choice, Gladys Gummies, and fifth choice, Poppy Popcorn. Other customers rank their choices as well. If Parker Pretzels is the favorite choice and wins more than 50% of all the first ranked choices, then Parker Pretzels is the winner and is featured as the snack of the month. However,
sorry.
if no snack gets more than 50%, then the least popular snack is eliminated. Sorry, Figgy Bars. The remaining second-ranked choices from customers who chose Figgy Bars are redistributed. So if customers chose chips and chicharrones as second choices, then those two snacks receive additional votes. The new totals are counted and the process repeats until there's a winner of the final two. Congrats, Poppy Popcorn, you're the bodega snack favorite. Back in the real world, before it's time to vote for humans, visit rankthevotenyc.org for more information. Thank you, New York City, for voting and for making these special and primary elections your elections.
So there is an example from the world of bodega snacks. So now we are going to jump into our mock election. So we've been running a mock election for Women's History Month of most influential New York City women, past or present. And so as we saw in the video, a candidate needs to hit 50% plus one of first choice votes if we are going in order to win. And if no candidate hits that number of first choice votes, then we go into the tabulation process, the round by rounds. And so here you'll see for this mock election that we've been running for Women's History Month, we've had 333 votes. So that winning threshold, that winning number is 167 votes. Here we see Shirley Chisholm in the lead with 116 first choice votes. Ruth Bader Ginsburg with 92, Eleanor Roosevelt with 31, Tish James with 21, Sonia Sotomayor with 19, Madam C.J. Walker with 15, Cardi B with 14, Marsha P. Johnson with 13, Bella Abzug with 8, and Mary J. Blige with 4. Because no candidate has reached that 50% plus one threshold, we now go into the ranking process. And so in this instance, the candidate with the lowest number of votes is Mary J. Blige, and she would be eliminated. However, her four voters will continue to have a say in the process by their 4 votes being redistributed to whoever they chose as their second choice candidate. So in this instance, we see that when Mary J. Blige is eliminated, that both Madam C.J. Walker and Tish James each receive second choice votes. And so we continue the process because no one has reached that 50% plus one threshold. So next is Bella Abzug. She is the lowest vote getter left in the race. And so her 8 votes are redistributed to whoever her voters chose as their second choice. And so we continue the process of eliminating the lowest vote getter and having their votes redistributed to whoever their voters chose as their next choice. And we continue the process and keep going and keep going and keep going until eventually someone hits that 50% plus one threshold. And in this case, we see it's Shirley Chisholm, who not only got to the 167 vote threshold, but exceeded that, far exceeded that. So she wins with 175 votes, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in second at 152. One important thing to note is that under the previous election system, a council member could be elected with as little as 20% of the vote. That means that 80% of voters voted for someone else and didn't have their voice heard in the final process. Here we see Shirley Chisholm winning with a majority of the votes, but also of those 333 voters who have voted in this election, there's only 6 who did not include either Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Shirley Chisholm on their ballots. That means there's only 6 voters who did not have a say in that final process. So with that, I think, Rebecca, I'm handing it back over to you.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, Sean. It was very informative, and I hope that that helped answer some questions that people might have had. And now I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel. We have Assemblymember Latrice Walker, we have Council Member Robert Cornegy, and I believe we might still be waiting on Public Advocate Jumani Williams, who I think will be joining momentarily. So, let's jump into it. I want to start with you, council member, because you were someone who has expressed some reservations about ranked choice voting. You were one of several lawmakers to file a lawsuit to try to, pause it, to delay it for the time being. And I'm curious, we now have 4 elections that have run with ranked choice voting. I'm curious how you think it's going right now, or if you still have concerns about education and outreach.
Yeah, I definitely have concerns about education and outreach, but let me start by saying this was implemented by an overwhelming majority of voters. It's here. It's a part of our fabric of life, and I'm so here for it. I just want to make sure that as a former district leader and as a former head of a Democratic club, a president of a Democratic club, who fought vehemently against any type of disenfranchisement, that even in under the guise of progress, we don't disenfranchise any voters, i.e. our seniors and or our non-English speakers. So the concerns still remain as to whether or not during a pandemic, we're able to adequately get the information into the hands of seniors who are not technology advanced and our non-English speakers who don't have access to the materials in the language that they need. So those 2 reservations still remain, even in the face of past elections. In my district and in my community still is an overwhelming amount of people. And I represent one of the last bastions of Black home ownership and Black small business, the Black ecumenical community, and Black political power left in the city and or state. And an overwhelming majority of those voters, 40% to 50%, have never even heard of ranked choice voting. So there has to be, and I'm doing it. I'm educating everywhere I go. I'm the ranked choice voting king. I wear a ranked choice voting shirt wherever I am. I'm in stated meeting today, so I don't have it on, right? I'm prepared for the stated meeting. But so I'm for pushing the agenda. I was also very much involved in other campaigns around the city, where we spent $50 million to make sure that we got voters engaged, and haven't spent much money and haven't committed ourselves as a city, I believe, in a way that's a robust effort for education. So those were where my reservations lie. That was the reason that I was a part of the lawsuit. I don't want to confuse that with someone who's not progressive enough to understand the value of ranked choice voting. I do. As a Black man in this country, I understand making sure that we're not disenfranchised. I just want to make sure that everyone, every single person, our non-English speakers, our seniors, their voices are heard in this new wave of election.
I guess just we're about 90 days, 3 months out from the June primaries, and this lawsuit obviously was back in December. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on what you've seen in terms of education. I know you said that you have a lot of constituents who still have never heard of it. Do you still think that the city is not doing a good enough job with education?
Yes, and when we've asked before for help in terms of materials and in terms of resources to make sure we spread the word, people have been telling candidates which there are a plethora of running on every level, to make sure as a part of their campaign, they're also educating voters. I don't know if that's the exact right way to do it. Now, myself, who does a feeding on my Wellness Wednesdays every week, where we feed between 500 and 750 families, has materials there at the ready that were produced by me, nothing from the city, that's produced in our housing developments I go into every single week. So there's no coordination or collaboration with the city on the dissemination of materials in those very valuable places where there are hundreds of thousands of voters who've presented themselves to election after election after election. They still don't have the information. And the only way they're getting it is through myself and partnering with Natasha Cherry Perez, who's one of the biggest ranked choice voting advocates, who pretty much travels around with me every week to make sure that not only the materials, but if there are any questions to be asked during those feeding programs, that she's there and that we have the materials to answer that. That's me as a council member and a candidate for another office that I won't discuss here, but that's me doing what I think is in the best interest of the constituents that I serve now and that I intend to serve. That's not the city working with me or anybody else to make sure that those materials are in the hands. So when I speak to somebody on a Wednesday, as I'm giving them a box of food, and I ask them, hey, have you heard of ranked choice voting? Because that's how I start the conversation. And they generally say, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I call over Natasha and I give them a handout. And then they walk away with that, with the intent and hope that they're going to read that material back and front and that they're going to disseminate it to anyone else in their household. That's not the type of campaign that I think is robust enough to yield maximum participation. There it again lies my concern. But I'm doing my part. Every time I've raised this concern, they said, well, then you get your behind out there and you make sure that you're educating voters. And so I'm doing that, not necessarily with any help or resources. There haven't been boxes of lit dropped off at my office. And people know generally that we're on the ground and on a weekly basis engaging with at least 500 500 families every week. You would think that if they had these materials, they would certainly drop them off. We're saying we'll do the work. So I've had to now reproduce those materials on my own dime, quite frankly, to make sure that if someone reads it at the site, if someone reads it when they get home, if they pass it off, that they at least have the information. And we're still getting 40% of the people that I meet with every single week are saying that they do not have the information. And we have non-English speakers who accompany me to the events just so we can help people. And those people are saying the same thing. That percentage is even higher, quite frankly.
Assembly member, I'm curious for you as well, what are you hearing from your constituents? Are you experiencing, similar kinds of, lack of educational outreach, I suppose, or lack of awareness about this change?
Well, absolutely. Folk are still just trying to figure out, what's going on here. And even when we have groups of, political wonks and voting rights experts, folk are still, all over the place and stepping on each other's toes with respect to, how this is going to be administrated. And but my perspective, I guess what also provides an additional lens is I'm the chair of the election law committee in the New York State Assembly. And one of the requirements that I have or charges there is to develop laws with respect to the administration of elections throughout the state, as well as oversee the administration in many different of the various 62 counties. And so I want to give a little bit of an update in terms of where we are now from a state perspective. At this point, there is a test plan that has been approved. New York City's vendor is SLI, and New York State's vendor is NYS Tech. And so basically, they're running some tests on the machine that we use in New York City is the DS200. It's from a company called ES&S. I know at one point in time, we were trying to get the express vote, but based on the various concerns about that particular machine and the disenfranchising apparatus that results that were happening, that didn't go through. And so the test is presently being conducted. Once that test is done, there will be a security review that will need to take place. Which will also support the review of that software. And then another independent subcontractor will have an opportunity to take a look and review the software as well. And then all of the results of all of these different various tests will be presented to the Board of Elections for the state of New York. And then those recommendations will go to the commissioners. But one of the biggest issues here is the fact that New York State has not implemented a statewide election law with respect to ranked choice voting. And so many of the commissioners or various commissioners have indicated that there is no magic button here that was touched in order for them to begin to do their work. And so because that is the case, the question becomes whether or not this is a valid administration, even in the elections that took place. And then, with, taking a look at the ballots, right? So the ballots don't look like the ballots are going to look for regular elections across the state. And the look and the form of a ballot is a construct of the New York State election laws. And arguably, the ballots that are being utilized in New York City does not comply with the New York State election laws. And so while, the lawsuit that took place may have taken place based on the education, but I think that there are a number of flaws with respect to the reliability of the software that we just don't know at this point. We're still going through the various reviews and tests, and we believe that we are maybe about 2 months out, at least from the conclusion of that process. And then in addition to that, whether or not there's some real compliance. And so I think that there are still a number of opportunities that we have to really take a look at the validity of what we're doing here. While I don't want to undermine, the progress that ranked choice voting gives us, as an attorney, as the election law chair, I want to do everything it is in my power to make sure that this administration of elections is done so in a way that is fair, is just, is equitable, and quite frankly, it's legal. And so these are just some of the concerns that we have that we will be working through over the course of the next few weeks and or months.
And I've certainly heard myself, having tuned into some of the state board commissioners meetings, some of this back and forth about whether New York was in the right, New York City was in the right to be passing this. I know that there's some differing opinions about, sort of local rule, local control of elections that kind of depended on who the commissioner was, who was speaking. And for anyone who wasn't already aware, the past 2 elections and the ones that just happened the first 2 elections and the one that just happened in the Bronx this week, they are all hand counts, because it is true that the state has not approved the software yet to tabulate those votes quickly. So certainly that would be a problem, certainly, if that software is not approved by the June primaries. Assemblymember, you said that it will take at least 2 months to finish up all of the testing and the making sure it's valid and accurate. Do you feel confident that it will be ready, the software will be ready for the June primaries?
Well, I just, quite frankly, I don't think that, I'm concerned about it being a rushed process. And, but, at the end of the day, this is the circumstances that we're in. Again, I am going to be looking at this very acutely. To really just make sure that that as many of the kinks as we can are adhered to or ironed out. But I also, do make a serious ploy to or call to all of the folk who are involved here to not just do what may be in vogue, but to also do what is just and what is right. And if it is too soon, then we all need to figure out whether or not those dynamics call for us to recognize that we may not have to do this in June. While we will still do it, it is it's better to have this thing done the right way, than to run afoul of it, like it has been in many other jurisdictions, and then to call into question the validity of our vote. I don't want to see us. I remember counting the votes when I was running for class president in IS 55, and we had little folded up pieces of paper and a hat standing around a table counting them. And while I recognize that this process of a hand count is much more I don't know, sophisticated than that process was, because I know there was a series of sorting of the ballots to make sure that they're done the right way. But there's also room for human error. And so, I'm no statistician, but I am, I do respect science. And so if there are any concerns or issues that come up, we just don't know. And all of those things will affect the timeline that we're all looking forward to here.
And before I throw my next question to the public advocate, who he joined us and we were in the middle of the discussion, so I'll welcome him now. I just want to address something that's come up, and I've seen come up in a couple questions. A misconception that if you rank one candidate as your first, second, third, and fourth choice, that your ballot will be disqualified. That is not true. It's not recommended, because that would mean that, basically you've only voted for one person, but your vote will still count. What you shouldn't do is vote for multiple candidates as your first choice. That will get your ballot disqualified. But if you're voting in person, the scanner will tell you that you overvoted and give you the opportunity to fix the mistake with a new ballot. So again, you can vote for the same candidate for multiple rankings. You just can't rank multiple candidates for one ranking. So
Rebecca, I also want to note too that we're good. So part of the testing that's being done also includes the functional testing, right? And so you got to test the error codes as well. And so while we know that we're testing them to make sure that the count is taking place, but also to make sure that the software recognizes that when those errors do exist, that the kickback that people are expecting to happen with respect to their ballot, if they voted for a multiple candidates all as their first choice, or one candidate as all of their ranking choices, that the ballot will in fact they will be notified that there are some issues with that particular vote.
And certainly that is a question. I know I observed it at the Queens District 31 election. There was sort of a surprising number of votes that were, invalid during the count. I was informed that people do have the option to force the scanner to take a bad ballot, and that the scanners have long been set up to detect overvoting, because when you vote for judges, you can sometimes vote for multiple judges, and sometimes people will fill in too many bubbles. For anyone who does vote for judges, that is, one of the lesser known races on the ballot. But certainly that is true. There's a lot of testing to make sure that everything is running smoothly, that no one is, that if mistakes happen, that people have a chance to fix them. Now, public advocate, I wanted to ask you, there's something else that came up in the questions, the idea of people only voting for one person because they don't know enough about the candidates who are running to make an informed decision about, to make an informed decision about 5 candidates that they can rank. What do you recommend, to candidates who are running right now, sometimes in very crowded elections? You ran in a very crowded election as well, a special election, very long ballot, lots of candidates, to make sure that people do know enough about the candidates to make these informed decisions.
Well, thank you very much for this discussion. I thank my colleagues here for being here as well, helping to illuminate issues, concerns, and even support. So thank you, Assembly member and council member. I want to just pull back for a little bit, because I've always been supportive of trying to find systems that kind of change the ones that are there. So whether it was participatory budgeting that kind of took away some of the power from the monies that I was giving and give it to the people, whether it was making sure that we have public financing in the state as well as the city. And for me, ranked choice voting was another one of those apparatuses. and I've been supportive of it actually since 2013 when there was a bill that was introduced. Unfortunately, it didn't get through the council. I also want to make clear that there is always going to be issues and concerns. There are right now, and I think everybody here would agree. We have issues and concerns with and shout out to Sean. You were so still. I thought that was your still picture, man. But we've always been concerned about issues no matter what's there. I don't believe that simply changing a system makes it that much more risky than it is right now. And just to be clear, as you mentioned, we have experience voting for multiple people. We actually have experience voting for ranked choice way back in the school board days, but we've had to make these kind of decisions very often when it comes to judges. Very often ballots look like they may be confused because we have ballot questions on there. So we go through this fairly often. But I have to acknowledge ranked choice voting obviously is something brand new to New York City. So we do have to spend the time to provide the education that's necessary. And I believe we are doing that. I actually was some concern myself about especially the special elections that were coming up. But actually, the special election in Queens, the exit polling showed that 80% of the people found it simple and very simple, and 95% people found it was very simple or simple. And I think that's encouraging. While I do think there's a lot more that has to be done. Only 88 of this about 7,500 people who voted in the special election in Queens was exhausted their first ballot, which means their ballot counted. It just didn't go in those other rounds. And so that means the vast majority of people didn't do that. I'm hoping that the vast majority of people don't do that. But I think all of us in this new system should spend some time, and this is one of the things that ranked choice voting does, making sure we speak to many more of our constituency that we might not, because we do want to get those seconds and we do want to get those thirds. And I understand anytime at any place that we will make this change, these concerns are going to be there. They're not going to go away, even if we postpone it to another time. And so my hope is that we can, continue to get the funding, more funding, and continue to do the education. My office is doing a lot of education. I heard the councilman mention the education he's doing. I know the assembly member is doing education. There's a lot of groups on the ground in these neighborhoods doing the education. That doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect. I know it's not perfect now, but I do think ranked choice voting empowers people and it empowers communities who have felt less empowered for quite some time. And so that's why I've been supportive of this, going on over a decade now. And I'm excited that it's here now and we're watching it very closely.
I do want to get back to the idea, though, of, obviously voting for one person is not a problem. That's a perfectly valid way to vote, even with ranked choice voting. But the hope is that people will utilize the ranking. And, there has been some concern, I suppose, to make sure that people are informed enough. I know it's sort of partly on the voter to be doing the research, which not, every voter has the time to research every single candidate running in a very crowded election. Public advocate, you are, running your own race. Council member, you were running your own race as well. Just to both of you, I just am curious about, what you're keeping in mind to make sure that, you are reaching the greatest number of people and that the people know who you are and know enough about you to be able to potentially, maybe you're not their first choice, but to be their second or their third choice.
I just want to I always want to make sure I frame it correctly, because the questions that you're asking, I believe, exist outside of ranked choice voting. And so I'm not even sure if everybody knows now who are the people running for mayor, who are running for public advocate, who are running for comptroller. Like, I think people are just beginning to get to figure out who's running. So they're not just learning about ranked choice voting, they're learning about all of the candidates. Some of the people who are being voted on in the past might be even more important than us, and those are the judges, as you mentioned. And I would defy to speak to 10 people and ask them who are the judges and what they do, what are their background. So this is a problem that exists that we have to combat, whether or not we have the ranked choice voting. The way I've always done that is to try to use the resources that we have through, whether it's mailers, whether it's going up on social media or regular media, or just being out on the ground. That's on the campaign side. On the OPA side, Jamila Rose, our Deputy Public Advocate of civic engagement has been doing the lion's share job of working with people like Sean, with so many other groups, and Metagamous for Social Justice, and Brooklyn NAACP, and others, and of course Common Cause, to educate the folks about ranked choice voting in particular. But a campaign is a campaign. And so we still have a campaign to run to let people know who we are. And if we are deciding to work with other folks in terms of ranked choice voting, then you do that. If not, you really just want to let folks know who you are, why you're asking for it to be their first, second, or third choice, and what ranked choice voting is.
So thank you, Public Advocate. But for me, I think the caveat is it's weird, but kind of dope when you come across somebody who may have another candidate who they're pledging their allegiance to and giving their vote to, and you get to then ask that candidate, well, why couldn't I be your second? Here's my issues. Here's my vision for the borough, or my vision for the office. I'd love to have your second. And that's a weird kind of conversation for those of us who are incredibly competitive, like the Public Advocate and like the Assemblywoman are on. You got three of the most competitive folks probably in New York City politics on this call or on this Zoom. And the weird part of that is when you have that initial contact and the person may suggest to you that they've got another candidate that they're favorable to, and then your next response is, well, I'd love to have the opportunity to be your second. That's new.
And certainly, as the Public Advocate mentioned as well about the judges, it is certainly is not a problem that has just come around with ranked choice voting. But in the past, maybe you don't know things about every candidate, but you only have one vote. Now it's, hopefully an imperative. It'll push people to learn a little bit more about more candidates, and push the candidates to really make sure that the greatest number of people are learning about them as well. And Sean, I wanted to ask you, the Public Advocate mentioned some exit polling. I believe it was performed by Rank the Vote. I wrote about that exit polling. Could you tell us a little bit more? It seemed, like it was that New York City is starting to point in the right direction, that things are kind of working out the way that, you had hoped.
Definitely. I think I was with you all on, either myself or one of my colleagues, on the very first one of these. And, us talking about our hopes. Now we're seeing that to come to fruition. 95% of voters saying they found the process easy to understand. 75% of voters saying that they understood ranked choice voting prior to walking into the voting booth. 67% of African Americans saying that they prefer ranked choice voting over the previous voting system. And this is before the major education initiatives are kicking off. This is before the CFB has launched television commercials and radio ads, then billboards. This is before our partners like Meals on Wheels is doing deliveries or including our materials in their deliveries in 13 different languages to all of their clients. It's before the Food Bank for New York is including our materials in 16 languages to all of their 900 partners who get food deliveries from them. So things are definitely going in the right direction. This is before the Supermarket Association is including all of our materials at all of their supermarkets. So there's definitely an outreach plan that's in place. And we are seeing the numbers going in the right direction.
Oh, wait, can I just, first of all, big shout out to Sean, because nobody knows more about this than him. He's come and presented almost everywhere that I've been. And I really respect and appreciate your knowledge and the hard work that you're putting in to get the message out. But I just want to say that there was a survey released yesterday, actually, or today, Fontes Coda Pulse. And in their survey, as of yesterday, only 15% of likely voters say they've heard, read, or seen a lot recently about ranked choice voting. And I understand you just pointed out several campaigns that will be rolling out very shortly. But of course, a concern with 14 weeks out from one of the most major elections in the city, where we'll see a huge turnover in the city council and a new mayor and a new comptroller. and so much shifting and changing. It's more essential now to get that number up. And it also says that while this is 3% point increase from January, so it's up from January, 3%, there's been more drastic rise in those who say they have heard nothing at all, 34% in January versus 41% in March. And if you add those who have only heard a little, fully 60% of voters have not heard much about ranked choice voting. Now, I talked about it anecdotally with me being on the street, on the ground, talking to people in particular in the housing developments. Now there's the statistical data to support the idea that not enough people know, which of course would give anybody who's worked in disenfranchisement, who's worked around trying to make sure some concern and some pause, whether it's for our seniors who are digitally challenged, or whether it's, and these are the two that I'm identifying like off the top of my head, seniors who are technically challenged, who may not get to see in a pandemic on top of everything else. So if, and everybody on this Zoom who's run campaigns before will tell you outside of a pandemic, we're knocking doors, we're at train stations, we're doing all the kind of things that would make this campaign way more robust, even as candidates, which we can't do because of the pandemic and the fear of spreading or coming in contact with COVID. So that is the last component that exacerbates the inability to disseminate the materials in non-English speaking language and to those who are technologically challenged, are exacerbated. And if I didn't, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, oh yeah, there's this big bad COVID epidemic that puts us at a tremendous disadvantage from going into senior centers, from going into, I'm only able to do these weekly food deliveries because we're out in open air and everybody's not coming outside. So I would even say that although 500 families come out, there's 1,500 families that should come out and we don't get that. So that's where the concern for me lies. And again, I said it anecdotally, and now I just want to give the statistical data to support what I had said earlier anecdotally. And by the way, I am for ranked choice voting. So I don't want to confuse that.
Councilmember, I think you'll be glad to know that we've actually started in-person trainings at senior centers in a socially distanced and safe format. And so we've done 2 of them now. We did them in the Bronx for the specials. We have a partnership with the YMCA where their facilities that are open will be doing outreach, and we'll be doing in-person, socially distanced and safe. We're also giving out PPE and other materials so that folks, have the hand sanitizer, thanks to the state, and have masks and have everything that they need to understand ranked choice voting.
So Sean, I hope you didn't take this as an indictment on you and your work, because that's not what I'm saying. So let's be clear. You my guy, Sean. You are my guy. Let's be clear.
I also just wanted to point out, and we should look at these numbers because it helps inform where we need to do education. But just to be clear, the focus was actually on the special elections, and that might be why we saw a large amount of people, at least in that one special where we did the exit polling, have a better knowledge that it was coming, because we did spend a lot of time in those areas. Now that they're finished and we're going to be able to spend time on the broader city, we might see those numbers begin to change.
So yes. But lastly, I just want to say an Emerson College poll reported similar alarming results, that 40%, according to Emerson College, not Rob Carnegie, found 40% of New York City voters have heard only a little about the new rank system, which I guess is even better than not hearing nothing at all, right? So we now have people at least who are viscerally getting engaged and are understanding, whether it's through our in-person conversations, whether it's through the work that Sean is doing, whether it's the work that the public advocate obviously is doing with him and his staff. So there is an increase. I get it. But you brought me here to illustrate my concerns and where they come from. So I'm only doing that. But I get the progress.
And I
don't know. I'm beginning to hear a lot of he said, she said.
No, I gave you the stats.
So, we got what, Rob's polls are saying, and then what Jamani's polls are saying. But at the end of the day, how does any of that, quite frankly, even make a difference? again, if we are not dealing with making sure that the main thing is the main thing. And quite frankly, no one from Rank the Vote or any of the other organizations have sat down with members of Programming Council and as well as the committee to be able to say, how do we bring this new phenomenon into compliance with New York State law? Like, that's the part. Like, we're having a conversation about, what's happening with respect to, folk on the ground and who knows what. And that's a very important conversation, being a voting rights person and always someone who wants to make sure that all of the tenets of the Voting Rights Act are realized with respect to language and understanding, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like, I'm having a hard time just like understanding, why are we not at least talking about the fact that there are still a lot of issues here? Because maybe we should be trying to make this ranked choice voting state law. How do we have runaway government, taking place right before our very eyes? And quite frankly, maybe this could be a conversation to say that, when New York City does a home rule, that they should be able to, make whatever determinations that they can make. And quite frankly, I agree with that. But there is a process, there's a procedure that has been set up. This is an institution that, it predates all of us in ranked choice voting and any other kind of voting, that I think is just not being adhered to. And that is a serious, serious, serious concern of mine.
So, I want to, as the chair of the committee, I think it's an important concern. I would say the main thing for me is making sure that voters are able to vote using this new system. And it is in the city charter, so we do have to get it done. So I think that I'm happy to have parallel tracks. If there's a concern, that concern should be continued to be discussed. Your concern seems to be whether—
What I'm saying is that it's not being discussed, and that's the thing that is most concerning to me. Because what happens where everyone finds out everyone is doing ranked choice voting, and quite frankly, Sean has done 10 million educational opportunities with my office too. So I'm not saying that I'm not promoting that. But what happens when all of that work is for naught, because we'll turn around and see that it'll be challenged in court and then it can't stand up. And then what? We're going to say, oops, we get to do it again. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out, like, it's very unsettling to me that this is just all over the place. And we just don't, we're sort of operating as if there is some level of like, this being concrete. But it's not. And I don't want to give people like the wrong impression that we're operating in this space. And then what happens if the recommendation is that the machines does not meet the validity of the test? And so now you say, well, erase everything that we just taught you and all of that work and all of the things that we've done, and we're going to go back to the old system, which creates more confusion than the latter. And so I think we need to be handling this thing on multiple different tracks, as you indicated, Mr. Public Advocate.
I would just add that I know our our sister organization, Common Cause, has been working with you on a lot of these election law stuff, on a lot of election law issues. Our position.
Never once have we had a conversation about ranked choice voting. Okay. Not one time.
Okay, that's good to know. Our role as Rank the Vote NYC is to make sure as many voters as possible, especially those who are hard to reach, understand ranked choice voting and get that information.
Assembly member, I want to know, to what extent is this still a problem? I was under the impression that the implementation of ranked choice voting itself in New York City was not a problem, and that our current electronic voting machines are, they are able to process the ballots on election day, so they didn't need to be reprocessed, and that the ranked choice voting itself, kind of falls under home rule for election administration in New York State, and that the only problem, which is still, a major problem, but an outlying problem, is the software to tabulate it. Is the
like, but but that is the problem, right? And it's like, so otherwise we're going to be handling this thing through another hand count. And so all I'm saying, and again, I think it's very important. My councilwoman was the person who sponsored the education bill in the New York City Council. We've been working together on the ground to make sure that people are informed, that they are aware. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, it's not an initiative that I support, because quite frankly, anything that makes voting easy and more efficient and fun and exciting and engages more people, I am all for it, because I know that at one point in time, people like me were asked to count how many marbles was in a jar just in order to be able to register to vote. So I get that, right? But the part that is concerning to me is a major component of this thing is still left out, and we do not have a agreed upon, recognized, and certified tabulation function. And unless we start to take a look at that and take a serious look at that, then I think sometimes some of this may be all for, as I mentioned before, for naught. So we have to have these conversations while we're talking about education. We got to be talking about the tabulation, whether or not there are any errors, whether or not there's going to be some validity to the outcome of these elections, because they have serious and severe consequences. And so I'm just trying to say there's a reason for a pause here, to be able to say, while we are continuing to do the work that we need to do with respect to education, that there's some other concerns that we need to be looking at that allows and creates an opportunity for New York City and New York State to be able to work together in order to make sure that this implementation is done as smoothly, efficiently, but also to make sure that it's done right. It's in accordance with New York State law, so that we're not back at this and litigating this thing throughout our court system just to figure out whether or not the election that we just ran, and all the work that was expended and all the resources that were expended really have to go back to the drawing board. And so that's, really all I'm trying to include here, that there are some other issues and concerns that I think that everyone needs to remain focused on.
And just to respond to the chair who's bringing up a lot of valid issues. I mean, one, the compliance is one piece. I believe that the city is in compliance. I think that's what some of the discussion is about. And I guess there was some court challenges that have helped move that belief forward, and I'm sure there will be some other ones. In terms of the tabulation, and I think we were all in support of some of the hardware that they were going to use. Many of us didn't want, and so I was very glad that that didn't get done. But I believe some of the tabulation software is being tested now with the special elections. From from what I've heard so far, it seems to be going well. I think there was some mixed results at the beginning, but it seems to be going well. I want to wait to see how it lines up with the hand count, as well as universal ranked choice voting tabulator has been used in other cities and has also gone well. And so we do have some things that we're looking at, and it seems to be going in the right direction. And because so many people voted for this when it was voted on, we don't want to ignore that either. It was put on a ballot. It was put in the charter. And so we can't just throw it out of the window and say we're going to pause because there's some disagreement. I think there's a firm belief that the city is in compliance. And so we want to make sure that voters have the ability to exercise their right to vote with ranked choice voting.
But what's the basis of the belief that the city is in compliance? What is that based on?
It's now in the charter.
Right, there's a city and then there's a state. So do you recognize that we don't have ranked choice voting across the state of New York? Right? And so the New York State, the Board of Commissioners is a construct of the New York State election law. And because there was no trigger because of state election law, then the question becomes, are they just doing this simply because it's the right thing to do? Or is there some place that actually qualifies the work that they're doing, with the exception of certifying the election results, because we have to certify any software changes. And then going back to the ballot, again, the ballot and the way that a ballot looks is state law. And so when you change a ballot, even if you're doing it in New York City, if it's not in compliance with New York State balloting laws, And I believe Senator Kevin Kavanaugh, maybe at the time when he was an assembly member, he was the one who introduced, even when any change that we make to our ballots have to be voted on and approved and signed into law. And so when you do something that's outside of that, then questionably it's outside of the legalities or the four corners of the New York State laws.
I would say
Yeah,
most of the city's elections is much different than the rest of the state. So I think we all know that pretty clearly. I don't know if there's any other city that has a kind of election system that we have in here in New York City. So by nature, it's a little bit different. As I mentioned, I'm happy for these conversations to happen concurrently, but there is a charter change in the city of New York. I'm the public advocate for the city of New York. And our job is to make sure that that charter is respected in terms of how we're dealing with the law, the election, and make sure that New York City voters. So I don't want to get it confused because there are different opposing points and different reasons. Some of them have to do with whether people are going to get the information. Is it going to disenfranchise? And we should continue to respond to that. So I don't want to just mix it up. There's another one that has to do with compliance that shouldn't be mixed in with all of those other things. And I do believe that the city is in compliance, and I think we just continue those conversations, but we have to address some of those other issues as well, because we should be ready. And all of the people who want to participate in the voting at all in June should have the information and the ability to do so.
Rebecca, can I jump in really quickly?
Sure.
Just say that I think we all can agree that at this point in time, at this moment in time, ranked choice voting is happening in the June primaries, and that we have to educate every single voter to ensure that they know how to rank their ballot. And I think anything else added into that, any level of confusion or concern, gives voters pause. Even as we're looking at the chat just in this session alone, people are confused about if ranked choice voting is happening, and if it is, how they need to do it. I think we really have to get to a point soon, we're 90 days out, that we're telling people how to process their vote.
We're 90 days out without any approved software, right?
Yeah, Assembly member, I just want to jump in here. I think that at this point, like, you have very valid concerns. I think that some of the commissioners on the state board have weighed in to say that the actual ranked choice voting is within home rule. So like I don't want to speak too much on that, but that it seems unlikely at this point. This was voted into law in 2019. We've had over a year now for legal challenges to be brought on the validity of ranked choice voting in the charter. I think that it is pretty much here to stay. Is a very valid concern about the software, which is still yet to be approved, even if it is being tested. But I think that at this point in time, we have to operate under the assumption that it is happening. Whether that's with a hand count, which admittedly will be a sight to see. So there's fingers crossed that the tabulation software is approved. But I think that, we're going to be finishing up this panel soon. I think that we should just, refocus on, what we need to do in terms of education, because at this point in time, voters approved it. It's in the charter, and it's set to be the election. It's set to be the election in June. So, what to go back to the idea of education, I think that everyone agrees that there could be more happening. Obviously, we're still 90 days out. Sometimes, people don't start paying attention to elections. A lot of people aren't even aware of who's running for mayor yet. What I'll throw this out to everyone who's on the call, all the panelists. What do you think right now is lacking that you'd like to see more from the city, from groups, from activists, from anyone who's doing education right now? What do you think is lacking, and what do you want to see to reach out specifically to the vulnerable communities, older voters, communities without access to internet, people who don't have time to do in-depth research about ranked choice voting? What more would you like to see, and what advice would you give to those who are doing education? for anyone who wants to weigh in. I guess the short answer is where do you see shortcomings and how do you think is the best way to address them?
I mean,
So
I
I
will
think
say,
sorry, go ahead. So I
go ahead.
think one of the things that we could do too is to address the sort of digital divide that happens within many communities of color. A lot of what's being done, as we know, is on platforms like this with Zoom and otherwise. And so I do appreciate the efforts as well as the call to make sure that we're doing more in-person educational opportunities as well. But we have to do more to make the type of investments within our city's infrastructure so that opportunities for internet access isn't something that just happens on Main Street, but it is also something that happens in local communities as well. And so again, I'm also reading the chat, and so don't get me wrong, it's not that I am not doing everything in my power to make sure that we are going into the schools, we're talking to our parent teacher organizations, we're talking to our senior centers, we're making sure that everyone is knowing and is engaged, because at the end of the day, you're right, this is the opportunity that we have presented before us in June. But there is also a level of healthy cautiousness that I do have, because quite frankly, again, making sure that Black and Brown people across the city of New York are able to engage in this process fully is really what is a priority for me.
And I want to just reiterate, just to make it clear, so there is no confusion. Ranked choice voting will be happening in June, even with these discussions. The software actually could have been certified a long time ago. The state, and there's arguments of why that hasn't happened, just refused to do so. But not because of the quality of the software that's there, and hopefully that will move quicker. There always is concern about disenfranchisement. There's always concern with any change. I remember when we went from the levers to the machines, we had a big discussion of what was going to happen there. Are people going to be able to use it? And people did. What we've seen consistently with ranked choice voting is actually more people involved, people feeling more franchised. When you look at San Francisco, they just elected their first Black female mayor. When you look at California as a whole, the people of more color who were elected increased a lot. Even in Oakland, where they already had people of more color who were elected, that increased, and you just look at the Black electors in Oakland, that even increased. So that's all we've seen. And so I know these concerns are there. I have had them, I still have them, but I also have them with the current system that's here. So we're pretending the current system is here, doesn't have some of the same concerns, and have yielded some results that weren't helpful. What I saw in Queens with the new council member, Brooks Powers, is that instead of trying to see if she would be ahead of Pesa Cocina after the ballots were counted, we've seen her jump ahead even more, showing that she actually had even more support. And so what we've seen is, while these concerns are real, they really haven't bared out in other places. And so we should keep our eyes on June so that we can get there. I do want to see more education. I was concerned a few months ago with CFB's testimony. It was very concerning. But I will say, since then, the Campaign Finance Board is going to have the provided materials in the 4 languages that needed in the Voting Rights Act. We're going to have more additional languages on top of that. The CFB has already trained 4,100 trainers at various organizations. We have different agencies involved. We're going to start citywide media on May 1st. We're going to start on May 24th. All voters will receive a ranked choice voting postcard. And so the polls that were mentioned, even where we saw some increases in education, that's even before the full court press is there. And I just want people to realize that. I don't want to have anyone be disenfranchised, especially the Black and Brown community. We just haven't seen this happen. But we do have to have more education on that. And we also have to make sure that on election day itself, there's enough people there that can walk folks through this. But I gotta say, I felt really good based on the discussions that happened after the election in Queens, because what it said to me was that the onslaught of education that happened right before the special, and the people who were on site, shout out to all the people who worked at poll sites, did the job that they were supposed to be. Only 88 ballots were disregarded out of 7,500, not disregarded, I'm sorry, were exhausted after their first ballot. So only 88 people voted for one person. That means almost all the 7,500 people did. And the vast majority of them found it simple or very simple. And that's what we got to focus on, because I do think we all share this concern of education, but I don't think it's going to lead to the massive amounts of issues and disenfranchisement that people think.
Sean, very quickly, I do want to ask, because the public advocate you are, the 88 votes that were exhausted, those were actually, I believe those are actually exhausted in the first round, as in they weren't counted at all because they had overvotes or some other mistake on them. But in the end, I believe about 12% were exhausted, which meant that, they were not part of that final count. Sean, is that, common? Is that an average amount that you see in other places? Or is there, cause for concern that, the system isn't working quite right just yet in New York City?
No, that's on par with the national average. So we see anywhere from between 10 to 12% of ballots exhausted in the final process. And so what we've seen so far in New York is on par, and it's actually less than what we see in judicial races, where folks get to vote for more than one candidate but may overvote. And that's in New York, I'm speaking of. So it's definitely on par. One thing I will add, I just want to clarify. So ranked choice voting is in New York City. It's not statewide. I think there's some confusion in the chat about that. But then as far as education goes, I want to give credit where credit is due. The Assembly member's office has been extremely helpful to us in getting to the governor's office. And so we are hopeful that in a couple of weeks, we'll be rolling out at vaccination sites that are run by the state, so that we're reaching people there with printed materials and with posters and signs. We have, again, partnerships where our materials will be at supermarkets. They will be at farmers markets. They'll be at places where people are still going, even in this time of pandemic, and materials are being delivered. We've worked out a partnership with the CFB where our approaches are very complementary to each other. CFB is doing all government agencies as well as a large scale public outreach. And we've been doing trainings, as I think all of our panelists have mentioned, whether it be 5 people on the training or a few hundred, we are there working with them to reach every single person possible.
And I just want to mention that the city agencies, additional ones are about to be activated. It's NYCHA, ACS, HRA, CUNY, DOE, CCRB, many others. This is about to happen. This is about to get activated. We got through the specials, and now we're about to focus on June 23rd and the June primary. And I think that's where we all need to focus on, even while we're having discussions on some of the issues that the chairwoman raised.
And I think that we are about to wrap up this panel. I just wanted to very quickly clarify a few things again. As Sean said, this is just New York City. It's not statewide because it was passed through a ballot referendum exclusively in New York City. So it does not apply to state races. We've talked about judges a couple of times throughout this panel. Judges are not going to be ranked. Those are technically state races. So if there are any other state races, for assembly, for the Senate, for governor, those are not ranked choice. And I think that the most prominent ones that you will encounter on your ballot this year are district attorneys, which are kind of confusingly state positions, not technically municipal positions. So when you go to vote for your district attorney, that will be under the old system, the plurality, you vote for one. But city council, public advocate, comptroller, and borough presidents are all ranked. So I just want to make sure that that is clarified and that people are aware when they walk in that it is possible that just to be aware that there will be a little bit of mixing on the ballot. So there might be some races where you rank and some races where you don't, but it's New York City races only and not the state.
Rebecca, and the non-ranked choice elections will be on a separate page of the ballot.
Thank you for clarifying that, Sean. It's good to know that they are being kept separate. So far, obviously, we've only seen special elections with the one race on the ballot. And New York City is well known for its very long ballots. And that won't be any different this year. So hopefully, if you're used to the long ballots in the past, this will just be another one. But this is, unfortunately, we are out of time for this panel. This was a very lively discussion that we had. I want to thank all of our panelists, Assembly Member Latrice Walker, and thank you for raising your concerns. They were very valid and definitely things that we should keep in mind and think about moving forward. Sean Duger, Public Advocate Jumani Williams, and Council Member Robert Cornegie, who had to hop off a little while ago to join the stated meeting at the City Council. So I'm going to hand it back over to Zach to close us out.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you to all of our panelists. I was definitely right. Brooklyn did this in the best way. But let's keep the conversation going as the 2021 campaign goes, and obviously with so much going on in city and state politics. On March 31st, we got our 2021 Above and Beyond event. Details are in the chat. Registration is free. Elected officials, mayoral hopefuls will all be there. On April 15th, we got our 2021 Virtual Healthy New York. And then on April 16th, our state legislative forum out in Rochester in the Finger Lakes. Details are all on cityandstateny.com. And if you really want to keep in the loop with the 2021 campaign, then you must sign up for Campaign Confidential, a weekly newsletter that is the must read, put out by my colleague, Jeff Colton. You can sign up at cityandstateny.com. I want to say thanks again to our wonderful sponsor, Spectrum, for helping us put on this great event. I'm Zach Williams, staff reporter for City and State. Catch you next time.